Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at something you might not expect coding.
Oh,
But don't worry, we're going at this as absolute beginners. Yeah.
okay.
We're breaking down this special language. It's called DataWeave. It's used for transforming data.
Okay.
Think of it like taking information in one format and changing it into another, kind of like translating languages, but for computers.
I like that.
We're using this podcast called DataWeave Decoded as inspiration.
Yeah.
And you know what's even cooler?
I don't.
There's this thing called the DataWeave Playground. It's this free online tool
Oh, wow.
that lets you experiment with all this stuff.
Right.
Think of it as like a digital sandbox where you can just play with data.
So you can learn and try things out without like any pressure or any complicated setups?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so let's start with like the why.
Okay.
Why is DataWeave such a big deal?
Well, consider how we use data today, right?
Yep.
Online shopping, scrolling through social media, businesses, using all these various systems. Right. All these platforms often use like different ways of organizing and storing data. Almost like they have their own separate languages.
Oh,
You know?
okay. So DataWeave steps in to help them understand each other.
Right.
I remember they mentioned merging names on the podcast,
Yeah.
something we all could probably use.
Exactly. It's like having a universal translator so all these systems can actually talk to each other.
Oh, cool.
DataWeave takes the data from one format and it smoothly converts it into another, making sure that everything flows like between different apps and platforms. So if you have like a list of contacts and the first names and the last names are in separate columns,
Right.
DataWeave can combine those. Super useful for like tons of things, making emails more personal, organizing contacts, even creating user profiles.
Okay, I see. So it's not just about like translating, it's also about making the data we already have like more useful.
Absolutely. DataWeave can handle all sorts of transformations. It goes way beyond just merging names.
Oh.
For example, converting between two very common formats that are used online, JSON and XML.
Okay.
JSON is basically a way to structure data using what looks like a set of instructions, kind of like a recipe for a computer.
Yeah.
XML, on the other hand, it uses tags to organize information, almost like creating an outline.
Okay, I see.
What's fascinating is that DataWeave can actually figure out what type of data you have. Numbers, text, dates, and so on. It's like having a built-in detective.
Right.
This is really important because you need to know what kind of data you're working with to manipulate it correctly.
Okay, now things are getting interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not just merging names. The podcast talked about leveling up skills.
Right.
What are some of those things that DataWeave can do once you kind of get past the basics?
That's where it gets really powerful. Let's start with variables.
Okay.
Variables let you store a piece of information and then reuse it throughout your script.
Oh, so instead of like remembering a phone number, it's like I need to use the same piece of information multiple times.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like let's say a customer's ID number. You can store that once and then easily reuse it throughout your code.
I got it.
Makes things much more efficient, much easier to read.
So variables make our code cleaner
Yes.
and helps us to avoid repetition. I get it. What about functions?
Functions are like pre-built tools that perform very specific actions on your data.
Okay.
For instance, let's say you want to capitalize all the letters in a piece of text. Instead of writing the code to do that yourself, you can simply use DataWeave's built-in upper function.
Right.
And there are tons of functions for all kinds of tasks.
Oh, cool.
Like converting text to uppercase, finding the length of a string, or extracting certain characters.
Right, so functions are prepackaged actions for common tasks.
Exactly.
Then there's data manipulation.
Right.
How does DataWeave help us pick out specific pieces of information from like a larger set of data?
Data manipulation is really where DataWeave's true strength lies.
Okay.
Imagine you have a large data set, like let's say a customer database, and you only want to extract the customers who live in like a specific city.
Right.
DataWeave gives you the tools to very precisely filter and select the information that you need,
I see.
making it incredibly efficient for working with those large data sets.
So it's like using a fine-tooth comb to get exactly the data we want.
Exactly.
Are there any resources out there for learning all these different aspects of DataWeave?
Absolutely. The mulesoft website has, a DataWeave learning environment with interactive tutorials.
Oh, nice.
And access to that DataWeave playground that we mentioned earlier.
Okay.
For a real quick overview, you can check out the DataWeave Quick Start. And if you are trying to kind of figure out how to do specific tasks, they even have a DataWeave cookbook with practical examples.
Cool.
And of course, there's the official documentation, which is, like your comprehensive guide to everything DataWeave. It covers all the different data formats, like those JSON and XML formats that we were just discussing.
Right.
And it goes into like how to work with them.
That's a lot to take in.
Good.
I'm already getting excited about the possibilities here. So we've talked about the basics. We talked about functions and data manipulation. It sounds like we've just kind of scratched the surface of what DataWeave can do.
You're absolutely right. And we haven't even talked about how DataWeave integrates with Mule Runtime.
Okay.
That's the environment where it actually runs. But don't worry, we'll get to that later. I think it'll be helpful to kind of dive into some real-world examples and see how all this comes together in practice.
That's great. So we've been talking about how DataWeave can kind of streamline those big business processes, like handling online orders and all of that.